It's no Green Knight. It's certainly no Moonfall. However, I still don't plan to watch this movie ever again. Okay, so I say that not because I want anybody to think that this is a bad movie. It's not really a bad movie. It's very well made, very well acted. The set pieces and the wardrobe and the just the atmosphere and everything about this is really well done. You feel like you're just in the heart of this mess, honestly. It's very gritty, it's very raw, it's brutal. And it's basically a retelling, well, when I was sitting there watching it, I was thinking it was a retelling or an adaptation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. And then I found out, no, well, I thought I had heard something like that, but then I found out, no, it's actually, it's an adaptation of what Shakespeare modeled Hamlet after, if that makes sense. I think it's called The Legend of Amleth. So, when I went into it, I felt like I knew where it was probably going to go because I went into it. I think before I even went in there and started watching it, I had the idea it was a retelling of Hamlet is what it was. And so as I'm watching it, I was thinking that is what it is. And I, felt like I knew for the most part where things were going to go. And then I found out later it was the other thing I told you. So the to this movie, I pretty much already listed the. It's well acted, it's well directed, the cinematography is very well done, the designs are very well done, the wardrobe's very well done, the action scenes are well done. They feel like a gritty type of just realistic sort of fighting that would have taken place back in the day during that time. Not your superhero flashy type stuff. Some of that, I feel like there was a little bit of that at the end when there was the final confrontation, the final battle that took place, which was beautifully shot. Despite the gore and the blood and everything, it just the backdrop of it, or with the location where the fighting was taking place, I thought it was just really, there was something very striking about that whole part of the movie. But so there's these, but at the same time, you can watch a movie and you can feel like that was very well done, but I don't want to see it again. And there have been a few movies that I've talked about being that way, that there's all these pros, but it's just the subject matter, the atmosphere, the setting. It's just not one that's conducive for me to want to watch it over and over and over and over and over again. So this is definitely not like on up there for me, but I don't necessarily feel like it's something that I can't recommend, because I think if you like period pieces or pieces that take, that have to do with Viking or Norse mythology, or come here she goes, that you'll probably really appreciate this. It's also quite heavily rooted in mysticism type stuff. There's no real necessarily supernatural things that go on, but it taps into the religion of the people these people, the Northmen or whatever. They talk about Odin, and they talk about Freya, and I can't remember. They talk about the Valkyries. We see an actual, real representation of a Valkyrie, as opposed to what we've been getting in the MCU. And a lot of it is kind of, it's woven in there, but it's not necessarily, it's sort of, it represents where his mindset is, what he's thinking, and sort of, it's kind of, I don't know, it's like it's got hints of it, but it's not really. You'll know what I mean whenever you get around to watching it, if you ever get around to watching it. With regard to the setting, the harshness of the land is just very, it's like a place that I would not want to be living. And it makes me glad I'm not living back in those times, because of how hard the land is and how harsh the weather is, and just so unforgiving and so brutal, and it just, like, it seems like, what value is there to this place? Just like, I don't get the appeal. I would not, why would anybody want to settle in this area? And yet people did. They were some rough, tough people, and they did, and they thrived, and whatever. But anyway, the story starts off with, you know the premise. This young boy, Amleth, he sees his father getting murdered right before his eyes. When I first saw the trailer, I was actually reminded of the Conan movie, the original one with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Kind of reminded me of that scene, but of course the storytelling is completely different. But it's similar in the sense that Conan sees his family die and he vows revenge. This is the same sort of thing, pretty much. He vows revenge. His father's been killed before his eyes, and so it shows the path that his life took to bring him to where he is. He goes off, he becomes a slave, and he ends up coming face to face with his uncle who killed his father. That's no secret. This is part of the trailer. But speaking of that, there was someone in the audience who was sitting to my left, a few seats that way. And my goodness, when the scene occurred of the father's death in the beginning, she let out this scream that I think probably startled everyone in the audience more than the actual what was going on the screen. It was like she never knew this was going to happen. Did she not watch the trailer? Maybe she didn't. Anyway, it was just like, well, that was really startling. Anyway, whatever. Like I said, with regard to the religion and the mysticism and stuff, there's a lot of that woven in. And honestly, a lot of times, while I understood what was going on, a lot of times it kind of sort of snapped me away from the storytelling of the real people that were involved. And also, there were times where his character's really tapping into his animal, feral type of nature, and he carries himself a lot like an animal. He walks, for most of the movie, he kind of walks with this hunch, with his head tilted forward. I kept wanting him to straighten his neck up, but he had this, like how an animal, when they're stalking their prey, they kind of like go like that, and the head juts forward and down. That's how he was in a lot of this movie. And it took me a little bit to recognize that was what was going on. I mean, I'm assuming that's what he was doing. I don't think that's his normal posture to be like that, but it reminded me of like this wild animal stalking its prey, and I thought that was pretty interesting how he did that. I think what I was getting around to was that there were times when he's tapping into his animal nature, like when they'll have these different it was represented in the beginning and happened some in the middle, and it's interspersed throughout the story. He's tapping into his, like I said, his animal nature, and he's doing these like howling and screaming and raging. After a while, that started to wear thin because it just, I don't know, I knew this was part of his nature. I mean, his nature. I knew this was part of his character. It was ingrained into him. He was a warrior. He'd spent his whole life fighting and being tough and just really, part of this mysticism and this religion and all these different, what's the word? Like they would do this stuff around the fire, and they would have all this chanting, and they would be wearing these animal hides and stuff. And but sometimes that, I don't know, it was just like I almost got to where I wanted to laugh because it just seemed so ridiculous the way they were. Especially like there was this one part where he's howling again, like I don't know, the second or third time, howling like a wolf or dog or something, and I'm like, okay, that just snapped me right out of the story. But with regard to the story, while I felt like the characters were really well done, for the most part, they kind of felt detached, or I felt detached from them because of the main character, Amleth, because of the way he is. I just couldn't form this bond with him. I mean, I certainly wanted him to succeed in what he wanted to do, but then as more stuff gets revealed, you find out that things are a little bit more complicated than what he thought as a kid. I mean, that doesn't necessarily make things right or okay what happened, but you see there's different layers to it. So I did like it in that respect, that the characters were nuanced and they weren't this, black and white sort of good guy, bad guy type thing. They all had these elements about them that were certainly shady, but that they, at the same time, they weren't all bad. even though they did all these bad things. It was a strange, combination, but I think that made the characters interesting. So, Nicole Kidman. Honestly, you guys, I like Nicole, but it's kind of weird because I feel like she's wearing thin on me. I feel like there's been this overexposure with Nicole Kidman, and I'm a little bit tired of seeing it by now. And especially, I don't know what she's done to her face or something. Like she's done something to herself, and she doesn't look like how she used to look. There's something going on with her jaw that I don't remember looking like that, but it makes her face look almost unnatural. It's a little eerie. I noticed it when she was in some movie where she played like this, I don't know, some cop or something a few years ago. And then I noticed it even more when I saw that movie that she was, it was not a movie. It was it called Harder They Fall or no, not that. It was an HBO show. I watched it in the plane on the way home from California last year, and I noticed it even more then. And I honestly, it's just unnerving. I'm so caught up in trying to analyze her facial features that I get a little distracted. But I didn't like her character in here too much, and I don't know how much of that is because of the character or how much of it's just that it's Nicole Kidman and I'm feeling like she's just everywhere. Whatever, I don't know. It's strange. I don't really have any sort of strong feeling about her one way or the other as an individual. I don't know if it's the role she has taken, but anyway, Anya Taylor-Joy is kind of becoming someone that I'm feeling like we're getting a little bit oversaturated, but she did really good in here. She was probably one of the only few truly good people as far as pure, no real badness to her in the whole story for the most part. And I thought she did a good job in here. And what else is there to say? I've mentioned the cinematography, and if you're familiar, like I said, with the story of Hamlet, you're going to guess pretty much where this goes. It almost gives me a hint of it. Even if I didn't know the story of Hamlet, just watching the trailer, I would have predicted what was up just based on how some of the people are shown in the trailer. I'm not going to mention it specifically in case you are not familiar with the story of Hamlet. If you aren't, good on you, because Shakespeare sucks. I hate Shakespeare so much. You're fortunate to have escaped exposure to his awful writing. I know he's so highly, he's like lauded as this one of the best writers. I can't stand him. I hate him. But anyway, if you're not familiar with the story, I do not want to get into the details because I'd like you to experience it as fresh as you can, like you don't know anything. You can't predict what's going to happen. But the film is honestly, it felt like it was a bit on the longish side. It was about 2 hours and 17 or 20 minutes or so. Obviously, about 5 to 10 minutes of that's going to be credits. But for the first hour, I wasn't really like things flowed very well. But then the second hour was when I started to check my watch every once in a while and say, okay, how much longer is this going to be? It wasn't because I was bored, because I wasn't really bored. It's got plenty of pros to keep you from being bored, but I think it was just because I wasn't as fully in touch with the story and the characters as I would have liked to be, and maybe that's not necessarily the fault of the writing or the acting or anything like that. It might truly just be the subject matter and the atmosphere were not something I totally dug, and that could be the only reason. This is pretty highly rated, obviously, among the critics. I think the audience scores are probably going to be pretty decent based on what I saw on Letterboxd. But for me personally, this isn't really going to be something that I would like to watch again. Out of the two movies that I've seen, that I've gone to the theater to see this week, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent and The Northman, I liked the Nick Cage movie more just because it was more fun. This isn't necessarily a fun experience. It's very sober. It's unsettling. It's very violent. just unapologetically violent, and just such a cold, barren, just unfriendly type of atmosphere and time frame that is just not something I could hook into and really, really enjoy. But that doesn't make it a bad film. It's just a me thing. But anyway, that's it for my thoughts on the Northman. Don't really have a lot more to add, so I'm gonna wrap this up and let me know what you guys think about it if you go check it out. The theater was, wasn't empty, but there were quite a few people in there. I don't know how this is going to do. This isn't really, like I said, a fun film, so I'm not sure that this is going to draw a ton of people to the theater, but I guess we'll see. Anyway, that's it. Later, guys. Bye.